10 years ago, during a visit to the local guild, Jade, a passionate young man, fell for the receptionist there. Back then, he was just a novice adventurer, barely starting his journey. Today, Jade swung his sword, slicing a slime in two, a surge of pride welling up as he defeated a monster entirely on his own. This was the first step in Jade's grand dream, to become a great adventurer. His first journey was quite simple: defeat monsters and collect the mana stones they drop. When monsters are slain, they usually leave behind two things: an essence called ether and a monster core, the mana stone. Ether is absorbed by the victor's body, and each time a new petal appears on their crest. This petal gradually forms a complete flower, symbolizing the adventurer's strength and achievements. Notably, each character class has a different flower design. Jade belonged to the Enhancer class, and he set his sights on reaching rank 10, a feat no one from his class had ever achieved before. Jade picked up the mana stone from the slime he had just defeated, and noticed a small crack on it. This would lower the reward money he received. However, Jade wasn't discouraged. He told himself he would try harder next time. He returned to the guild's reception hall, located in the heart of the imperial capital, and looked for an open reception counter. Jade saw that counter number 18 was open and walked over. When he reached the counter, he came face to face with a beautiful receptionist who took his breath away. Everything about her was perfect in his eyes: her gentle eyes, her long, silky hair, and the charming beauty mark under her eye. Her name was Garnet, a name that perfectly matched her radiant beauty. Though Jade was too young to understand matters of the heart, he knew this was love at first sight. Garnet tried to get Jade's attention, snapping him out of his daze, but Jade's composure shattered because even her voice was angelic. If there was proof of the god's existence, it was Garnet. She regretfully informed him that due to the crack on the mana stone, she could only pay him 500 gold. Jade no longer cared about the money. The only thing he wanted now was to talk to Garnet, but the only way he could meet and talk to her was by accepting quests. He asked for a quest catalog, with the goal of taking on as many quests as possible, just for more chances to talk to her. It was a perfectly sound and rational plan. Day after day, week after week, Jade took on progressively harder quests, all for just a few minutes of conversation with Garnet. 10 years later, on a rugged, rocky mountain path, a giant rock golem made the ground tremble. Two adventurers poured all their strength into one last-ditch effort to defeat it, using every trick up their sleeves. The old man used a shatter spell, but realized in horror that the golem was completely unaffected. Understanding there was no other way, the girl suggested they retreat. However, as they fled the forest, the golem suddenly crumbled into rubble. The girl asked if the man had used some secret technique, but he just pointed toward a nearby cliff. Jade, now a rank 10 adventurer, had come to their rescue. They asked what a rank 10 adventurer like him was doing in a place like this, and Jade almost blurted out that Garnet had told him to come here. He quickly corrected himself, saying he just came to defeat the golem, and had taken it down just by throwing a rock. The girl was certain he would use his enhancement and reinforcement skills on a sword to fight, but Jade explained that his sword was merely symbolic. They asked why he still carried the sword, and the old man guessed it was for self-discipline. The truth is, Garnet had bestowed this sword upon him on behalf of the king, and ever since it had touched Garnet's hand, he had never let it out of his sight. Jade felt relieved to see they were okay, and the group prepared to head back. The girl asked how to become as strong as him, and Jade replied that as long as she never stopped trying, she would eventually reach his level. The old man guessed that Jade's perseverance was thanks to the power of love, which genuinely surprised Jade. He had never told anyone about his feelings for Garnet. The old man added that it must be everyone's love for him, and Jade decided to just let them think that. Jade returned to the guild with a giant mana stone, and his arrival was met with cheers and praise. Even though he was rank 10, he continued to use the regular reception counter instead of the special ones reserved for high-ranking adventurers. Jade just wished everyone would quiet down and hoped Garnet didn't think he was some weirdo. He nervously waited for his turn, and when he was called to the counter, his eyes were once again drawn to Garnet. She hadn't aged a single day. Jade lived for moments like this. He abruptly placed the mana stone on the counter, and she asked for his name. Jade, come on, you're embarrassing yourself. It's been 10 years, and she doesn't even remember your name anymore. Despite that, Jade secretly admired Garnet's beauty as she inspected the mana stone he had brought. She was beautiful from every possible angle. Once she finished her inspection, Garnet handed Jade a check for 50 million gold. But that also meant goodbye, and Jade didn't want it to end like this. However, this was the limit of their relationship, and all he could do was prolong it. He took the check, but their fingertips brushed against each other for a brief moment. Jade nearly lost his composure right then and there, but Garnet remained perfectly calm. He swore he would never cash this check, but would frame it and hang it in his house. Immediately, Jade took another quest from the catalog, and the loop continued. Jade believed that if he kept this up, they would one day become friends. He would do this until he couldn't anymore, even until the end of his life. As she stepped away from the counter, Garnet lightly touched her own hand, right where her fingertips had met Jade's. In a remote village, a group of men were discussing how their request for an extermination force had been approved, and that adventurers were on their way to hunt the beast. Nearby, a girl overheard their conversation. Jade completed the monster extermination quest, and the entire village celebrated his return. They invited him to stay and rest for a while, but Jade refused, saying he had to return immediately to prepare for his next mission. And his next mission was really just a chance to see Garnet. However, a little girl from the village insisted that the vegetable-stealing dragon was still around. Although her words were dismissed as a child's wild imagination, she insisted she was telling the truth. To calm the little girl's fears, Jade asked where the dragon flew off to. The little girl pointed to a secluded area in the village, and Jade promised to investigate thoroughly. The little girl thanked him, and the village elder apologized for the trouble. But for Jade, this was all in a day's work. He headed to where the dragon was spotted, though he didn't believe such a large creature could be hiding in an abandoned mine. Suddenly, a suspicious voice called out, telling him to stop. Jade moved toward the sound of the voice, where it continued to demand that he leave behind any food he had. When Jade reached a small, seemingly abandoned house, he discovered a little girl in ragged clothes. He wondered why a child was out here, and recalled that some types of dragons could shapeshift into human form. He asked the little girl if she was a dragon. The little girl admitted it, praising Jade for figuring out her true identity. She proudly declared that if she were in her original form, she could swallow him in a single bite. Before letting himself be eaten, Jade asked why a dragon would willingly turn into a human. The girl unhappily replied that her original body was so large she could never feel full. So she figured if she shrank down into a tiny human, she could temporarily keep her hunger in check. Jade thought this was rather sad. She'd been craving meat for a while, but her small body made it impossible to hunt. He asked why she didn't just use her dragon form to hunt, but she explained that bad people called adventurers were roaming around hunting monsters, and they were probably after her as well. However, upon learning that she'd been spotted raiding a farm for vegetables as a dragon, she hurried to run away before the adventurers arrived. Jade grabbed her hand and told her that he was an adventurer. The little girl stared at Jade for a moment and then panicked, running around in terror. Jade reassured her that he doesn't hunt lolas. The girl believed him, and Jade concluded that this dragon girl meant no harm and was simply hungry. He asked if she was a white dragon, since that species was considered protected. The girl swore that she was a white dragon and that she would prove it. She ran outside, took off her clothes, and transformed into a sparkling white dragon. Since Photoshop hadn't been invented yet, this was all the proof Jade needed. She returned to her human form and asked why white dragons were protected. Jade explained that long ago, a white dragon had saved his country from ruin. The girl promised to be a good dragon girl from now on. Jade suggested they go see the king. If she received a protection order, she could live peacefully with all her needs met. The girl agreed, and the next day, she showed up in a stylish summer dress. The dragon girl accompanied Jade to meet the king of the Sundale Kingdom. When the king saw Jade, he assumed he was there to accept the offer to become the next king. Jade politely refused once again, and explained that he had come with a white dragon who could use transformation magic. The dragon girl stiffly introduced herself, promising that she could dress and feed herself. She swore not to cause any trouble and begged the king for a protection order. The king happily agreed, owing a debt of gratitude to both Jade and the white dragon species. However, he couldn't just let a little dragon girl wander around unsupervised. Seeing the dragon girl holding back her tears, Jade immediately offered to be her guardian. The king gave him his blessing, and the little dragon girl was incredibly grateful to Jade. Jade asked what he should call her, and she allowed him to choose a name for her. He decided to call her Doromi. She thought the name was a bit simple, but accepted it anyway. They stopped by the Adventurers Guild, which Doromi found to be a scary place full of ill intent. Jade went inside the guild to report his mission to Garnet, leaving Doromi outside. Feeling nervous because there were so many people around, Doromi calmed herself down by peeking inside. She noticed Jade was happily chatting with the beautiful Garnet. Even an immortal dragon girl like Doromi was captivated by Garnet's beauty, and her impression of the guild slowly began to improve. Jade came back and prepared to take Doromi home. He revealed that he hadn't been home in over a year, being too busy with missions. But now things would change because he had a little dragon girl to take care of. They took a long, leisurely walk to Jade's house, starting their new life together. Outside, a girl noticed her neighbor had finally returned. The responsibility of caring for a little dragon girl suddenly fell upon Jade's shoulders. On the way back, Doromi commented that the guild seemed like a very fun place because Jade looked so cheerful when he left. She was only partially right, as the real reason Jade was so happy was because he got to see Garnet again. Finally, they arrived at Jade's house, a modest two-story wooden house with an incredibly prominent heart design. Doromi thought the house was amazing. Jade had chosen to express his feelings in the coolest way possible, by dedicating his entire house to honoring Garnet. Every nook and cranny of the house was decorated with hearts. The carpenters had mistakenly thought they symbolized his love for everyone. Jade led Doromi inside and showed her the interior. The lights in the hall turned on automatically. The spacious bathroom was the pinnacle of luxury with a lavish, round bathtub. The bedroom was built with the finest materials, and its softness was almost illegal. Finally, they entered the walk-in closet, which displayed dozens, if not hundreds, of adorable, stylish outfits. The collection even included 28 wedding dresses, and among them was Jade's absolute favorite. Everything in this room was designed exclusively for Garnet, with outfits for every imaginable occasion, mood, and style. Doremi wanted to see these dresses being worn, so she asked Jade to call his wife over, the wife who supposedly owned all these wedding dresses. It was then that Jade realized what he had done was truly bizarre, and that only a pervert would be proud of it. Jade considered confessing the truth to Doromi about this house of horrors, but in the end, he decided to distract her with the promise of a delicious meal after their mission. Doromi finished her bath and came out sparkling clean. She thought it was a waste that Jade wasn't home more often, but an adventurer's missions had to come first. Jade told her they would be leaving early the next morning, so she should go to bed after dinner. Doromi eagerly looked forward to sleeping in that big, soft bed, while Jade silently prayed that one day he could wake up next to Garnet. Jade renewed his determination to continue his missions, just so he could see Garnet again. While walking around the house, Doromi noticed one of the neighbors leaving. Model. As far as Jade knew, his neighbors were a kind, elderly couple. However, his eyes widened when he saw Garnet step out of the house next door. It felt like Jade's brain took a century to process this information, and he was swarmed by a million questions, the most important of which was, what was Garnet doing here? Doromi ran over to greet Garnet, and she replied with a good evening. Jade tried to stammer out a greeting to Garnet, but he was completely overwhelmed by her beauty. In fact, he realized this was the first time he'd ever seen her in casual clothes, and she looked absolutely stunning. So much so that he burned the image into his mind forever. After composing himself, Jade did his best to wish her a good evening. Garnet replied in kind, and Jade silently celebrated having his first non-work-related conversation with her. In his mind, he was already imagining their wedding. Garnet was also happy that she could finally talk to him, even if it was just to introduce herself to her new neighbor. Now that he knew Garnet lived right next door, Jade had even more reason to hurry home as fast as possible. He introduced Doromi as a relative of his, and as he was about to introduce himself, Garnet cut in, saying she already knew his name since he came to the guild every day. Jade was so overjoyed that he declared it the happiest day of his life. He had previously believed she didn't know his name, but Garnet explained that it was a strict guild procedure to always ask for adventurers' names. Suddenly, the conversation turned awkward as Jade had no idea what to say next. He tried to offer to carry her bag for her, but Garnet refused, explaining that it currently only contained her underwear. Doromi asked where Garnet was going, and Garnet explained that since her house didn't have a bathroom, she was planning to go to the public bathhouse. Jade was hoping Doromi would offer Garnet the use of their bathroom, but the little girl just waved and said goodbye. Jade screamed internally as Garnet left, but he still seared the image of her departing back into his mind. Doromi realized that Jade liked Garnet, and he frankly admitted it. There was no need to be ashamed, as Doromi proudly declared that she loved Jade too, but only like a puppy loves its owner. She asked if Garnet had helped Jade with anything, and he explained their relationship. Doromi suggested that he should give Garnet a flower as a thank you for everything she'd done. She remarked that she could smell the scent of earth on Garnet, which meant she might enjoy gardening as a hobby. This was the best piece of advice Jade had ever heard in his life, and he vowed to find a rare flower to give her. Jade and Doromi set off for the desolate plains, a harsh and barren place where Barreths could appear at any moment. Finally, they reached their destination, the World Tree, situated between enormous cliffs. At the base of the World Tree was the Starflower, an extremely rare plant that had been the goal of their search for the past 2 weeks. Jade had asked the florist which flower would be the best gift, and they all gave him the same answer: the Starflower. It was a flower so rare that not even the most prestigious flower shops carried it. Doromi was disappointed to learn they had to climb the rugged cliffs to get the flower, but Jade said there was an easier path, though it would take a whole week to traverse. However, he wanted Garnet to have this flower right now. Jade began to climb the cliff with relative ease, and Doromi exclaimed that climbing was even easier than flying. However, as they neared the top, they heard the scream of a woman in danger. Even though he wasn't sure if it was Garnet, Jade couldn't ignore someone in need of help. The scream startled both Jade and Doromi, and he quickly climbed to the top of the cliff. When they arrived, Doromi warned him that a giant horned worm was attacking 2 adventurers, and one of them was already badly hurt. Without hesitating, Jade rushed in and killed the worm with his powerful punches and kicks. The two girls burst into tears of joy and thanked Jade for saving their lives. The girls couldn't believe that the great hero himself had come to save them. One of them apologized, saying her barrier wasn't strong enough to stop the horned worm. But Jade thanked her for it, explaining that he was looking for starflowers, and thanks to her barrier, the precious flowers were undamaged. The two girls were happy to know they had helped him in some way. They waved goodbye, and Doromi said that Jade was really cool back there. Jade showed her the pot of starflowers he had picked, which had even started to bloom. They had achieved their goal, so Jade decided to head home. He hoped that Garnet would like this gift. However, when they got home, the starflower had wilted beyond saving. Jade almost fainted from disappointment, but Doromi convinced him to try watering it. He did so, but before a full day had passed, he had already written it off as a failed attempt. They tried to cheer the flower up by calling it the best flower ever, but as expected, nothing happened. As a last resort, Doromi suggested they give it to Garnet. Jade thought it was a silly idea, but Doromi argued that since Garnet knew a lot about flowers, she might know how to save it. Jade thought about it for a long time, and finally decided it was worth a shot. They went to Garnet's house, but no one answered. Doromi guessed that Garnet might be at the public bathhouse. Jade argued that hanging around in front of her house would make them look weird, but Doromi reassured him that he wasn't scary or weird at all. Jade repeated her words to reassure himself, but just then Garnet appeared and caught him doing it, making him look even more like a weirdo. Jade noticed that Garnet's hair was still glistening with water, meaning she had just finished her bath. She looked even more enchanting than before, and he felt like he could stare at her forever. But he remembered he was there for another reason. They quickly apologized for bothering her, and Jade quickly brought out his gift. He solemnly presented the wilting starflower to her, as if clinging to his last shred of hope. Garnet found it strange that he was the one giving her a housewarming gift. Jade apologized for the flower looking so wilted, but insisted that it had been vibrant when he first picked it. Garnet looked closely at the flower and realized it was a starflower. She said she loved this type of flower. Jade's heart and mind exploded with fireworks, but he had to remind himself that she was talking about the flower, not him. He asked if she could save it, but she regretfully said she couldn't. Garnet explained that starflowers need nutrients from the world tree, so when separated from their natural environment, they can't sustain themselves. She apologized for not being able to help them, but Jade said he was the one who should be sorry for bringing such a pathetic gift. However, Garnet didn't mind at all and asked if she could keep the flower. Jade happily agreed, but Garnet said she didn't need the pot. Garnet planned to press the flower and turn it into a bookmark, to preserve its beauty forever. Jade felt his head spinning, just like a high school girl in love. He handed the flower to Garnet and shyly thanked her instead of letting her thank him. Garnet accepted the flower and promised to always treasure it. Jade was completely love-struck. He wished her good night, and she did the same. She also thanked Doromi for the housewarming gift, making Jade look like the happiest man on earth. On the way home, Jade celebrated this victory, as their plan had gone off without a hitch. He thanked Doromi for her help, and promised to treat her to anything she wanted. The next day, Garnet started using the bookmark made from the starflower, and her coworkers couldn't help but notice it. They complimented her on the super cute bookmark, and asked where she got it. Garnet explained that she'd recently received a flower and had turned it into this bookmark. When her coworker asked Garnet where she got the bookmark, she thought of Jade's face. A small smile crept onto her lips, and she simply replied, "From my neighbor." 2 weeks had passed since Jade gave Garnet the starflower, and he returned to the guild after completing another quest. He entered the guild hall and braced himself to go to Garnet's counter, which was always the small, memorable counter number 18. Jade saw Garnet, and she was as radiant as ever. She confirmed that the mana crystal he brought back was from the Chimera subjugation quest, but before she could begin the inspection, a loud rumbling sound suddenly echoed. Jade wondered where the sound was coming from, and then realized it was her stomach growling. Although Garnet skillfully hid her embarrassment, Jade could still see a faint blush on her face. He tried to think of a joke to lighten the mood, like, "Doromi's hungry all the time too," but even he felt it was a bad idea. In the end, he wasted time thinking and let the moment pass. Before he could say anything, their brief exchange was over. Jade left the guild without taking on a new quest, just to save Garnet any further embarrassment over her growling stomach. Jade stepped outside and met up with Doromi, who was proudly boasting that she had counted 18 bugs today. Jade suggested they go out to celebrate, and the two of them headed into a rather empty restaurant, one that Jade had visited many years ago. Truth be told, before adopting Doromi, he rarely ate out. The owner was surprised to see the great hero return to his restaurant. Doromi introduced herself and loudly declared that she loved stew, so she wanted a bowl of stew packed with meat right away. Jade ordered the seafood, and the owner went into the kitchen to prepare their meals. A few minutes later, he brought out their orders. Jade and Doromi began to eat, and were amazed by the incredible flavor of the food. Luckily, their clothes remained intact from the flavor explosion, Suddenly, the doorbell rang and another customer walked in. Jade was surprised to see it was none other than Garnet. He wondered if she wanted to have dinner with him and had followed him all the way here. But as it turns out, Garnet was simply a regular at the restaurant. Not everyone is like you, Jade. Jade eagerly waited to find out what Garnet's favorite dish was. But the chef apologized, saying he had just served the last portion of seafood, the very dish that Jade had just finished eating. Jade couldn't stand the look of disappointment on Garnet's face, so he stood up and vowed to go get some fish for the restaurant. The owner was thrilled that Jade was willing to do this, but in reality, Jade was doing it for Garnet, not for him. However, the owner warned that this might be difficult, as there seemed to be a monster terrorizing the coast, preventing the fishing boats from going out. Both Jade and Hiromi felt this monster was unforgivable. Jade asked if there was an extermination quest open for it, and Garnet remembered that there was, but it was only for level 6 adventurers. This explained why Jade, a level 10 adventurer, had never seen the quest. However, according to the guild's rules, Jade couldn't accept this quest unless it was upgraded to his level. But there was a loophole. Suppose he didn't treat it as a quest. Suppose he went out to sea, and suppose the monster attacked him, and suppose he defeated it, and suppose Garnet would fall in love with him for it. The next day, Jade and Hiromi went to the coast, where he owned a charming seaside villa. Just like his main house, he rarely ever came here. Hiromi asked why he had this villa, and he replied that it was for the beautiful ocean view. The truth was, he bought it so he could watch the sunset with Garnet. Jade is so delusional, I can't even get mad. I just feel sorry for him. Jade went into the villa to get some fishing gear. Hiromi asked if he was planning to use it to catch the monster, but he insisted that he was just going fishing for now. If the sea monster happened to attack him, then so be it. Jade planned to bring the fish he caught back to the restaurant owner, hoping to raise his affinity points with Garnet. A flawless, perfect plan. They headed to the harbor, but Jade could feel that the atmosphere here was quite tense. Hiromi found Jade's boat, the relaxing kind meant for quiet, romantic trips. She carefully boarded the boat, but some sailors loudly warned them not to set sail. Jade asked why they couldn't go out, and the sailors explained that someone had recently spotted a kraken, and going to sea right now would be a disaster. Jade asserted that he needed to set sail immediately. When the sailors saw his small boat, they remarked that the kraken probably wouldn't even notice him. This completely ruined Jade's plan to use himself as bait. So he offered a large sum of gold to the owner of a nearby galleon. The sailor refused, saying that no amount of money could convince him to set sail. Jade then promised to cover the full cost of repairs or even buy a new boat if it was destroyed. When they found out he was Jade, the hero, their attitudes changed. They asked if he was here to slay the kraken, but he explained that he'd just come for some fishing. Jade shared his plan. If the kraken attacked, he would defeat it in self-defense. They asked why he was willing to go as far as using himself as bait, and Hiromi chimed in, saying they were just doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. As a small thank you to all the local fishermen, the men were touched by Jade's dedication and compassion. Hearing Hiromi's words, the boat owner offered Jade free use of his boat. In no time, they had themselves a large ship. The only time you'd see two people manning such a large vessel is in a game of Sea of Thieves. Jade cast his line and quickly reeled in a small fish. Not to be outdone, Hiromi cast her line too, but didn't get a single bite and started to pout. Jade suggested that maybe her spot wasn't very good and offered to trade places. Hiromi was thrilled, finally feeling like she had a chance to catch something. Soon after casting her line, she felt a powerful tug from something huge. She pulled with all her might, and was shocked to reel in a giant sea scorpion. Jade realized this must be the monster that had been harassing the fishing boats. Hiromi threw her collection of small rocks at the scorpion to try and scare it off, but that only made it even angrier. She feared the ship would capsize, but Jade reassured her, saying he had already reinforced it with his magic. All they had to do now was take the monster down. Jade leapt forward and defeated the sea scorpion with a single punch, sending it sinking to the ocean floor. They returned to port victorious and shared the good news with the sailors. The sailors were incredibly grateful to Jade, as they could now go back to fishing in safety. Jade's mission here was complete, and now Garnet could enjoy some fresh fish. Later, Jade and Hiromi decided to head back to the restaurant from yesterday for dinner. Just as Jade had hoped, Garnet was in the area too. He approached her, and this time, he successfully struck up a conversation. After a bit of small talk, they told her they had just come back from a fishing trip and happened to defeat the monster that was plaguing the nearby waters. Hiromi excitedly recounted how she had practically single-handedly taken down the sea scorpion, with her rocks, staring it down without flinching. This story was almost entirely fabricated, but Garnet decided to play along, saying she had thought Jade would be the one to defeat the monster. Garnet asked if he'd be stopping by the guild tomorrow, and he promised he would. Just then, Jade realized that Garnet had noticed his absence today, and she admitted that she had been worried. When Garnet said she was worried because he didn't come to the guild today, Jade felt like he could die of happiness, but he was content to simply be overwhelmed with joy. Jade was used to being seen as an unbeatable adventurer, so you can imagine his delight to know that Garnet was worried for his safety. He wondered if she thought he was unreliable, but Garnet shook her head and explained that she didn't think of him as Jade the hero, but as Jade, her little brother. She said that she had watched him grow up since he was 12 years old, so she was very fond of him. Jade realized how lonely it was to be treated like an untouchable hero on a pedestal, so he was happy that there was still someone who treated him like a normal person. But then he realized something important. Garnet only saw him as a little brother, not as someone she could have romantic feelings for. Jade felt disappointed, but he was determined not to give up hope. When he learned that Garnet was also planning to have dinner at the restaurant, he invited her to eat with them, reasoning that they would have a hard time finishing the food by themselves. All the fish they had caught were brought to the restaurant, and Garnet happily agreed to join them. Jade walked shyly beside her, unable to ignore her pleasant scent and the beauty. He felt like they were on a date, even though he knew all good things must come to an end. His blissful walk with her only lasted 5 seconds. But he decided he'd become a regular at this restaurant to spend more time with Garnet. The owner happily welcomed them back, and they brought out all the fish they had caught. He thanked them, saying this would be the last time he could make them a delicious meal. Jade wondered what he meant by last time. Garnet handed him a bouquet of flowers, though it didn't seem to be for a birthday or any special occasion. Jade asked what was going on, and the owner explained that today was his last day working at the restaurant. He had worked in the food industry long enough and planned to move back to his hometown to live with his daughter. Jade offered him a bag of gold as a retirement gift, but he refused, saying Jade's kindness was more than enough. Jade teared up, realizing this was the last time he would ever eat here. He cherished every moment as he enjoyed his final meal in his favorite restaurant. When his elbow brushed against Garnet's, Jade knew this was a happy moment he would never forget. One evening, Doremi was telling her friends in the city a fantastical story about how she defeated a Hydra. Before she could embellish the details, Jade walked out looking like his entire crypto portfolio had just crashed. A few minutes earlier, Jade had gone to the guild to report his mission to Garnet. He had been in a good mood lately, because he could now hold a conversation with her without getting too nervous. He walked through the familiar doors and, as usual, Garnet looked absolutely stunning. Before he would have been so nervous he couldn't say more than 3 words without stuttering. But things had changed. He comfortably handed her the mana stone from today's mission. While Garnet was inspecting the stone, she suddenly broke into a violent coughing fit. This made Jade extremely worried, thinking maybe she had caught COVID or something similar. After receiving his reward, he rushed outside without accepting a new mission. Jade didn't want to bother Garnet with prying questions, but he feared this might be the last time he'd see her before something terrible happened. He recounted his encounter with Garnet to Doremi and became determined to find the panacea, a medicine that could cure any illness. He didn't know if it actually existed, but he decided that if it didn't, he'd will it into existence and then find it. Doremi eagerly offered to help in any way her tiny hands could. The first thing to do was to set aside 1 billion gold to pay an apothecary to develop the medicine. They went to the local apothecary shop, but Doremi panicked when she saw jars filled with floating eyeballs. Jade reassured her that they weren't going to dissect her or anything. Just then, a woman walked out holding a bloody bone saw, and Doremi fainted on the spot. The woman quickly apologized for scaring her, explaining she was just busy cutting up some monsters for ingredients. Jade smiled and greeted the woman, Surin joking, "Long time no see." Surin was the granddaughter of Ku, a famous physician, and the owner of this apothecary shop. Jade had hoped to see Ku, but Surin explained that her grandmother had just retired and moved to the countryside. Model. What the heck? Are housing prices here dirt cheap or something? Jade thought to himself. He had hoped to get help from a top-tier pharmacist like Miss Ku, but Surin insisted that she could do just as good a job as her grandmother. Jade placed all his hope in her and begged Surin to help the girl he loved. Surin started by asking about the girl's symptoms. Jade explained that Garnet had a cough and a sore throat. Surin told him to feel free to browse the dozens of cough medicine options in their shop, but Jade refused to use any of the normal over-the-counter drugs. "To me, this cough is a serious matter, and I want an extremely special kind of medicine." Surin repeatedly tried to confirm that Garnet's only symptom was a cough, but Jade insisted that she was knocking on death's door. Surin had a feeling this request was going to be more trouble than she first thought. Surin reluctantly agreed to try and develop a special medicine for Garnet. Jade added fatigue to Garnet's list of symptoms, which made Surin agree to formulate the medicine right there on the spot. She asked Doremi to help get the ingredients, but the little girl nearly fainted when she was asked to bring a bottle of dragon's blood. Jade did his best to reassure the terrified Doremi. A few minutes later, Surin completed the special medicine to treat Garnet's cough and fatigue. She charged him 30,000 gold, which made Jade wonder how it could possibly be so cheap. He happily handed over the money and rushed back to Garnet's house to give her the medicine as soon as possible. Jade knocked on the door, and he breathed a sigh of relief to see that Garnet was still alive. For goodness sake, sir, she only had a cough. Jade hurriedly placed the bottle of special medicine in Garnet's hands, explaining that he had been worried about her all day. However, Garnet explained that she was already all better. The problem was just a small fishbone stuck in her throat, which had been bothering her the whole day. Garnet was surprised to hear that Jade had been so worried about her. Jade almost let it slip that he liked her in a romantic way, but he quickly corrected himself, saying that she was a special receptionist for the guild, and that's why he had gone to the trouble of having a special medicine made for her. Garnet said that the guild had lots of other receptionists, but Jade replied that she was special to him. He also mentioned why she had given the bouquet to the former restaurant owner, as a show of her kindness. Garnet smiled, happily accepting his concern. Although she was no longer sick, her flowers were still weakening. Suddenly, Garnet invited Jade into her house to see her flowers. The sudden invitation surprised Jade so much that he looked as if he'd just been proposed to. He quickly regained his composure and carefully stepped into Garnet's house for the first time. As expected of Garnet, the house was neat and tidy, so much so that he could hardly believe he was actually there. Doromi noticed a small pot of withering flowers, and Garnet quickly used the bottle of medicine. She poured the medicine into the soil, and to the delight of all three, the flowers bloomed in just a few seconds. They celebrated this small miracle together. Garnet thanked Jade and Doromi for their help, but they were both just happy to help her in any way they could. Just then, Doromi's stomach started to growl, and Garnet mentioned that she was just about to go out for dinner. She invited them both to come along, and Jade nearly jumped for joy at the opportunity. Being invited to dinner by the girl of his dreams was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Jade couldn't have been happier. A few days later, Jade was reminiscing about the wonderful time he'd had with Garnet. Suddenly, he and Doromi were woken by a loud noise, coming from right next door. A sense of dread washed over him, and he immediately thought Garnet was in danger. Without wasting a second, he rushed out of his house and came face to face with Garnet. She frantically begged for his help, saying something was on the second floor but not specifying what. Seeing the sheer panic on Garnet's face, Jade immediately thought it must be a thief or a burglar. He told her to stay close to him, and tasked Doromi with protecting her at all costs. For the first time, Doromi actually felt motivated to work. Jade entered Garnet's house, vowing to destroy whatever was threatening her. He went into the bedroom, which Doromi noticed was messier than usual. Jade deduced that a fierce struggle had taken place there, which only intensified his hatred for the mysterious attacker. However, he saw no trace of them. Garnet suggested that the stranger might still be hiding under the bed. Jade lifted the bed, and suddenly something small and fast darted out. This was enough to make Garnet recoil in fear, and Jade was extremely jealous that Doromi got to comfort her. It turned out the attacker was just a small spider. Doromi complained that spiders were terrifying because she once got a stomachache from eating one. Garnet nearly fainted, but Jade had promised to handle it and he wasn't about to break his word. He tried to catch the spider but failed, as it quickly scuttled away and hid under Garnet's pile of clothes. Although he was a little hesitant to touch her clothes, Jade didn't want them to think he was afraid of spiders. Pushing aside any reluctance, he dove in and finally caught the spider, tossing it outside. However, in the process, he accidentally broke Garnet's bed. Garnet reassured him it was no problem, as she was planning to get a new bed anyway. Garnet gave Jade her sincerest thanks and said she was really happy to have him as a neighbor. Jade couldn't have asked for a better reward. Still, the problem remained. Garnet's bed was broken. Jade offered her his bed, and Doromi quickly agreed with the suggestion. Garnet thanked them for being such great friends, and Jade felt incredibly happy. A few minutes later, he was dragging his bed into Garnet's room. Garnet hesitated to accept the bed, which looked so expensive, so Doromi suggested they swap beds. Garnet saw no problem with that idea. Jade told Garnet to call him anytime she needed help, and she replied that she would be counting on him. Jade was overflowing with happiness, carrying Garnet's bed back to his place, still not quite believing it was really there. He climbed into the bed and realized her scent was still lingering on the sheets. This was perhaps a little too stimulating for him. And as expected, Jade couldn't get a wink of sleep. He woke up the next morning feeling even more tired than when he'd first gotten into bed. Meanwhile, a young girl was preparing to step out into the world for the first time, hoping to become a great adventurer just like Jade.